I start with a pretty simple data set where you see some tools parameters. I have data over time with a production line, project family, and some parameters here, in this case, temperature and pressure. Out of this data set, I created a very simple box plot. And I want to, before going through reference elements, I will show you what's new on the box plot and some of the new capabilities. First thing we are adding, and it's from the statistic table here, you see you can add measures. So you can either add measures that are built in the product, or you can type now your own. So I can add standard deviation, for instance, give it a name, and boom. That's the way I add custom measures in the statistic table. I can choose the formatting. So now this is a very simple expression, but you can use your own expression. If you have custom KPIs that you use internally, you can write pretty complex expression and display this information as statistical measures. I mentioned the violin. So you see, and actually, by the way, at the same time, you see the new visualization properties experience. The main difference here is that I don't see all the properties. I just add the properties I'm interested in. And here, what I want to add is the density distribution. So I just add a violin, and boom, just like that, I have a violin layer that is added to my visualization. And you have the end on what method to use to compute the violin. If you're used to display histograms in boxplot, both works great together and they look great together. The boxplot gets split. If I remove the violin, then we just display the histogram as you're used to. What else? Yeah, we are also, let me check. We are also adding support for displaying labels in the boxplot, axis labels. Let me remove the statistic table. So before 14.6, you would have to use the statistic table to be used as the x-axis labels. Now we are adding to show labels in the boxplot, and we are adding the ability to show the labels vertically. That's what I was telling you before. And the last enhancement we are making to the boxplot is the horizontal orientation. You just go to the appearance tab here and choose to display the boxplot horizontally if you prefer this way. Let me move it back to this. Yeah, so these are the enhancements we are making to the boxplot: expression-based statistic table, density distribution with the violin plot, x-axis scales labels and vertical orientation of the labels, and horizontal orientation of the boxplot. Now that we've explored the new boxplot capabilities, I want to move to what I believe is the highlight of Spotfire 14.6, reference element. So in this case, starting with this boxplot, what I want to show is a trend line over this boxplot. So you see now, next to the visualization title, I have a plus button. If I click the plus button, it allows me to add what we call a reference layer. So I will just click this. By default, when you add a reference layer, we display the average of the y-axis information here by category. Here, what I want to create is a trend line based on the median value. So I'm just changing the expression to median. All right. And you see that my lines change. And I don't want to display lines, so I remove lines. And I have a set of options to build my reference layer. I can display markers, lines, box, bands. I will show you all of that. I will first add markers. So here I'm adding markers for each median value for each box plot. I can choose a shape, either choose a default shape or leverage the new capabilities we introduced earlier this year with a custom marker shape capability. You see here I have a set of, I have different collections that I could pick from. Let's stick to the default shape here. So I can choose a shape, define a marker size, a color. Then I want to add maybe the median value, so a label to this. I can choose how to display the label, the alignment, here aligned to the top, the direction, the font settings as well. I will keep it like this. And the only thing that I need to add now to build my trend line is just to add a line connection. And just like that, I can style my line, switch a bit the width, switch the color, and just like that, I grid a trend line on the box plot. That's just a quick example of a reference element. So here I'm adding a reference element to a box plot, and I'm displaying markers and creating a connection between these markers to display as a trend line. And like I was saying in my presentation, it's fully working with color by, trellis by. So here in this case, I'm displaying it's the same box plot with the same information, but I color by production line. And I also have created a trend line for each production line. So I have 3 trend lines. I will show you another example. All right. Now, in this next example, we'll continue exploring reference elements. In this time, I will focus on how you can use the reference element to visualize control and specification limits for process data. So here I have quite the same data sets, but I have 2 data tables. On the left, I have a data table, same for some tools information and some process metrics over time. And I have tool specifications and control limits in a separate data table. I will directly switch to the final visualization. Here you see, this is what you can do. So first, you can add here a control limits view. These are the lines in red that you based on my tool limits data table. I just select upper control limit or lower control limit and display a secondary value for my lower control limits here and display these as lines. These are my 2 lines. And I added a second reference element, which is for my specification limits. So it's quite the same. It's 2 lines between a primary value here with my upper specification, the lower specification at the bottom. And the difference here between the 2 is that in addition to simply show 2 lines, upper and lower, I'm shading the area between the 2 here in green, just by adding a band. Where I can choose the fill color, I can choose to display border, I can choose also to display here in the appearance how to display the band. It could be in foreground, background, the span eventually, but in this case, it's not relevant because it's in trellis. So that's yet another example of how you can use reference elements to display your control and specification limits. And since both of these reference layers depends on a metadata data table, every time that product specification updates, they are directly reflected in this type of visual. And you see here, for this example, you directly see what data is below or above your specifications or control limits. 2 other examples really for inspirations. Here I can provide, this is a line chart, and in this case, we draw 2 lines. So you see two reference layer, 1 reference layer with 2 lines and a band based on the calculation. I think here the calculation I'm using is based on the 3 sigma calculation. So you display a primary value as a top line, a secondary value as the below lines, and you just display this as a band with a color fill in gray and a border that you see in darker gray right here. Another example I can provide here is combining raw data with aggregated data view. Here in this case, we have a scatter plot that represents the raw data points, and on top of it, we layer a box plot that is built with reference element, and you retrieve all the elements that constitute a box plot. So it's a way to show to combine a detailed data view like a scatter plot with aggregate data within the same visual. So you have the box plot here that summarizes the distribution and highlights outliers, and the scatter plot that shows all individual data points here. That's something that we've heard many requests, especially in life science and semiconductors. And I will switch back to my last demo. There. Okay, so this is to show you how I mentioned match on column names before. We have column matching functionality for quite a while to link two data tables together in visuals, and we are improving this in Spotfire 14.6. So here in this example, I have two data tables. I have a wide data table that contains like 30 or more data columns with parameters measures. And I have a limit data, which contains for each parameter some specification limits or control limits. If I switch to my next page here, I retrieve the same. I use my parameter data table here to interact with this histogram, where using the probably unknown feature, but using the column form mark here, you can use column form mark to drive visualization. So based on the column row selection here, I'm driving directly the axis selection right here and which column value to display. You see, if I switch parameter, the data change. And this is done using the columns from mark functionality that we have from quite some time that I believe is very powerful. Now I want to display limits on this histogram, and I have prepared a reference element group that is hidden and that I will unhide. And now you see, similar than what we showed before, you see limits, control limits, and specification limits. But the problem here is that there is no way to link between these limits and the parameter that I choose. They do not change. So let me show you what we did to speedify, let's say, this issue. Now, the only thing I have to do is to go to data table matching. And you see, Spotfire tells me there is no match for the limits. I just click add match. On the left data table, I keep it to column names. And this option is actually what we are having in 14.6. And on the right table, I simply choose parameter and click OK. And now I'm done. We have the column matching set. There is no need to do any pivot or unpivoting of the data. Just match based on the column names. And now I can display control limits, specification limits for each parameter that I selected using the column from mark capability. That's what I wanted to show you for my demos.